welcome to Americans Learn. My name is Lauren, and today I am making a massive mistake. And that mistake is watching The Picnic at the Battle of Bull Run, Tasting History with Max Miller. The reason that's a mistake is because I am very hungry. I'm very, very hungry right now, and I want food. So watching somebody talk about food and eat food and make food feels, well, foolish. Feels like going to the grocery store when you're starving and you have a crisp $20. It's like you're just gonna buy something terrible. Anyway, I actually had a ancestor who lost an eye at the Battle of Bull Run. My whole family, in various times of U.S. history, both sides of it, everyone settled in Pennsylvania. I don't know why they all settled in Pennsylvania. I know my mom's side of the family, they were all farmers. Like for years and years, like from 1702 until 1945, or everybody born on my mom's side of the family was a farmer. But I all I really know about this is I know that we learned about it at one point. Like we talked about it as a family. Some guy lost his eye here at this Battle of Bull Run. And now we're going to talk about the picnic. Anyway, that was fun little family history out of the way. And I'll stop stalling and get to the part where I look at the food that they ate and get hungry.
When the first battle of the American Civil War took place in July of 1861, along with soldiers on the battlefield, there were spectators, people who had come to watch the fighting while enjoying a picnic of foods like these sandwiches and pound cake, which I'm making using recipes from the period. So thank you to Bombas for sponsoring this video as we picnic at the Battle of Bull Run, this time on Tasting History.
He looks so clean cut in this one.
On July 21st, 1861, the first major battle of the Civil War took place in northern Virginia. In the north, they called it the Battle of Bull Run, named after a river. And in the south, they called it Manassas, which was a nearby town. To make it even more confusing, a year later, there was another battle on that same spot. So there's actually a first Battle of Bull Run and a second Battle of Bull Run.
I didn't know that they called it Manassas. I guess I grew up in the north. I've been to Manassas. I went to school not too far from there, but...
Or Manassas, whichever you want to call it. But as for picnickers, they were only there at that first battle. See, at this time, people thought that it was going to be a very short civil war. One decisive victory on either side, and it would all be over. Today, we know that it would drag on for 4 long years, but back then, they didn't know that. So, not wanting to miss the action, people from Washington, D.C. came down with picnic baskets to watch the battle.
I mean, you know what? I was about to say, absolutely ridiculous. People are gonna die, but people did used to go and watch executions too. Like that used to be one of the entertainments for a really long time, was literally watching people die for fun. So this does track with something that, they don't really care that people are gonna die. This is what people do, I guess.
William Howard Russell, a war correspondent for the London Times, wrote that every carriage, gig, wagon, and hack has been engaged by people going out to see the fight. The French cooks and hotel keepers, by some occult process of reasoning, have arrived at the conclusion that they must treble the prices of their wines and of the hampers of provisions which the Washington people are ordering to comfort themselves at their bloody derby.
That's kind of freaking hilarious. Read them for filth. He's throwing so much shade at everybody. Amazing.
And others recalled that these comforting victuals came in the form of sandwiches and pies and cakes. And so I'm going to make
those damn French raising the prices of their wine.
Some sandwiches and a cake. And I'm going to use a recipe from a northern cookbook for the sandwiches and a southern cookbook for the cakes.
That makes sense.
We'll start with the cake because it takes longer to make.
Okay.
This recipe is from Mary Randolph's The Virginia.
I would definitely trust the Southerners with their fattening sweet foods more. Just because have you had proper Southern cornbread? Anyway.
Housewife, which was written in 1824, but was still wildly popular in the 1860s. Pound cake. Wash the salt from a pound of butter and rub it till it is soft as cream.
So unsalted
Have ready
butter,
a pound of flour,
creamy.
sifted, 1 of powdered sugar, and 12 eggs well beaten. Put alternately into the butter, sugar, flour, and the froth from the eggs, continuing to beat them together till all the ingredients are in, and the cake quite light. Add some grated lemon peel, a nutmeg, and a gill of brandy. Butter the pans and bake them. The flavorings of this pound cake, especially the brandy, are kind of what make it unique.
That does sound good, but
from today's pound cake, which is usually flavored with vanilla. But the essentials, the 4 main ingredients, remain the same. You want a pound of each. So it's best to do this recipe with scales. Okay. You should always have kitchen scales. But if you want to do it by volume, you can. And so what you'll need for this recipe is 4 sticks or 450 grams softened butter. And you should use salted butter. She says that you need to wash the salt out of the butter, meaning that she was using extremely salted butter, but there would still be some salt left, and that's going to be closest to modern salted butter.
Okay, cool. Good to know, because I did not know that. But also, it's like, I guess I just didn't even consider how much of the other stuff she was putting in. I was like, blah, 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 blah. But the 12 eggs, that just feels like a lot of eggs to put into anything. But I think I'm just used to cake being crack 2 eggs. And that's as much as you're putting in there. Or the cookies or something. It's 2 eggs is usually what I've used in baking. And 12 feels like a lot.
Then 3 3/4 cup or 450 grams powdered sugar. And powdered sugar today is actually confectioner's sugar, which usually incorporates some sort of starch in it. So you can make your own powdered sugar, but honestly, it's not going to make any difference in this recipe. Then 1 pound of eggs. And here you really need to weigh the eggs because they can vary wildly. She was using 12 eggs for a pound, which are pretty small eggs. For me, it was just 8 eggs after taking them out of the shell, and that is how you want to weigh them. Also, I was so happy that the yolks perfectly lined up in a circle. I thought that was fun.
That is cool. I love the little satisfying things like that. It's enjoyable.
Then 3 2/3 cup or 450 grams of flour, 1 tablespoon of lemon zest, 2 teaspoons of nutmeg, and a half cup or 120 milliliters of brandy. And that is quite a bit of brandy for this cake, so it should have a nice booziness, something to warm the cockles. Something else that will warm your cockles is a nice comfy pair of socks like the ones from today's sponsor, Bombas.
I have
Most of my socks today are now from Bombas, everything from my compression socks, which I wear on long flights. If you're going anywhere for this summer, I definitely suggest them for the plane, to my wonderful assortment of athletic socks. They're pretty much what I wear every single day now, especially with the summer coming because they go well with shorts, and I'm trying to run more often, and they protect my delicate little ankles with this nifty tab. But Bombas isn't just about ankle care, though they are, but they are also about helping people out. For every item that is purchased, they donate an item to a shelter. 1 item purchased is 1 item donated, and they have donated now over 150 million items. They've also started shipping internationally to over 200 countries. So feel good and do good with Bombas. And right now, new customers will get 20% off of their first purchase when you use my link in the description, bombas.com/tastinghistory, or use my code tastinghistory20 at checkout.
I will say I do like my Bombas socks. I do have a pair of Bombas socks. I've had them for years now, and they are still great. They are still so good. No holes. They they're good things. I like the Bombas socks. I wear them to work a lot of the time because they're comfortable, and they are, again, they help with ankle support somehow. They're soft. They give me a little bit of extra cushion in my feet. They're good socks.
That is 20% off of your first purchase for new customers. Now, back to the cake. First things first, start by beating the eggs until they are nice and frothy. This is where most of the air that will give the cake its rise will come from, so the frothier the better. Many pound cake recipes today will add a little bit of baking powder, and that will really help to make it nice and airy, more like a modern cake, but at this time, just the eggs. Next up, beat the butter until...
If we were gonna do this the proper way, surely he should have just a spoon, right? Or a whisk, maybe?
It is nice and smooth. And you don't want to overbeat it so it's like whipped, because it will have trouble holding on to those air bubbles. Just beat it until the butter is nice and smooth. And then add about half of the sugar and beat it in, creaming the butter and sugar together. And once it's smooth, add the remaining sugar and continue to beat. Then do the same with the eggs, about a third at a time, making sure they are completely incorporated before moving on to the next third.
Just try not to scramble them.
Then you can add the brandy and mix until just combined. Then whisk the nutmeg into the flour along with the lemon zest. If you add these later, they will not be as well dispersed, so it's best to add them to the flour before adding the flour into the batter, which you can now do. Start with about a third of the flour at a time, and you don't want to beat this in, you just want to mix it until it is just combined and there are no streaks left. Then you can bake this in a large loaf pan that you'd use for like making a big loaf of cake, but if you have smaller cake loaf pans, then you'll probably need 2 of them. And you want to make sure to butter them really well and add some flour to help prevent the cake from sticking. Then you can divide the batter between the 2 pans, smoothing the top, and set them in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 Celsius for 45 to 50 minutes, or until they are browned on top and a toothpick inserted comes out with just a few crumbs. Then remove the cakes from the oven and let them cool in the pans for 10 minutes before turning them out to let them cool completely. And it will take a while for them to cool completely, which gives us time to make our sandwiches, gives you time to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really does help out the channel.
That cake looks good.
And we'll still have time to talk a little bit more about those picnickers at the Battle of Bull Run. The American Civil War officially began on April 12, 1861, with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. But it wasn't exactly off to the races after that. There were no big battles for a while. Mostly they were using that time to prepare for something bigger, something that they knew was coming. And so a large volunteer Union army was assembled just outside of Washington, D.C., but they had signed up for 3-month contracts, which by the end of July, they were almost up, and so this army could possibly dissolve. So President Abraham Lincoln, worried that his army was going to disappear one day, urged his general Irvin McDowell to march south and seize the new Confederate capital at Richmond, Virginia. Well, McDowell, knowing that these troops had never seen any real action and had only a few weeks in some cases of training, said, "They are absolutely not ready," to which Lincoln replied, "You are green, it is true, but they are green also. You are green alike."
How is that good? That's like, yeah, we're so not ready for this. And he's like, true facts, but at least you're not ready together.
Acknowledging that yes, the Union Army didn't know what they were doing, but neither did the Confederate Army. And on July...
Okay, that makes more sense. The
Union Army didn't... They are green also.
They are green. Okay, I was thinking he was talking about you, like you, the general, and they, like they, the troop. Okay, he's talking about the other guys. That makes so much more sense. He's like, yeah, but they don't know what they're doing either.
So you are green alike. Acknowledging that yes, the Union Army didn't know what they were doing, but neither did the Confederate Army. And so, on July 16th, McDowell left Washington.
Let's just give a whole bunch of people who don't know what they're doing some very destructive weapons and have at each other.
And with an army of 35,000 men, the largest army ever assembled in North America at the time. Large? Yes. Disciplined? Not so much. McDowell wrote that as they were marching into Virginia, they stopped every moment to pick blackberries or get water. They would not keep in the ranks order as much as you pleased. They were not used to denying themselves much. They were not used to journeys on foot. Now, the Confederate capital was only just over 100 miles south of Washington, D.C., but standing between McDowell and the Confederate capital was the Confederate Army of the Potomac, which was led by Brigadier General Pierre-Gustave Toutant Beauregard, a name I always enjoy saying. And that army would soon be reinforced by a smaller army led by Brigadier General Joseph Johnston. So hoping to fight the Confederates before these reinforcements arrived and before most of his army dissolved because their 3 months enlistment was going to be up, McDowell decided to have the battle there at Bull Run, or the area around Manassas Junction. And word of this impending battle got back to Washington, D.C., and like I said, most people thought that this was only going to be a one-battle war, and so it would be over in a couple days.
I think he has like a little bit of highlighter on his nose that is not blended in as well as it should be.
On to Richmond.
It just is like just right there.
Richmond, and that would be the end of the Confederacy.
I'm just
so people were like, let's go watch it, and let's make it an outing. It's lovely July weather outside. Let's do picnics. So the morning of the battle, carriages and wagons poured out of the city on their way to the area around Centerville, about 25 miles outside of Washington, D.C.
I know a lot of people from
where they
Centerville.
could get a good but safe look at the battle which would be taking place below them. And William Howard Russell, the war correspondent, wrote about all of these people leaving the town just before he did himself. Of course, being a war correspondent, he was going for work and not just to watch a bunch of people die. And so that morning, he wrote in his diary that I swallowed a cup of tea and a morsel of bread, put the remainder of the tea into the bottle, got a flask of light Bordeaux, a bottle of water, a paper of sandwiches, and having replenished my small flask of brandy, stowed them all away in the bottom of the gig. Now, some of the spectators were just civilians who were going to see the battle out of sheer curiosity, but then many of the spectators were there in a slightly more official capacity, mostly congressmen from different northern states. And there was a private who was in the Union Army who saw a bunch of these congressmen coming through Centerville on their march. We saw carriages and barouches which contained civilians who had driven out from Washington to witness the operations. A Connecticut boy said, "There's our senator!" And some of our men recognized Senator Wilson and other members of Congress. Every one of us expected to have our names in the papers when we got home. We thought it wasn't a bad idea to have the great men from Washington come out to see us thrash the Rebs. The area that many of the spectators ended up watching from was Centerville Heights, which was a few miles from the battle, safe distance, but close enough that they could see the smoke and hear the cannons. And in this area as well was a Union artillery officer named Captain John Tidball. And he had been ordered to hold his guns back from the battle until hostilities began, so he was able to witness the throngs of sightseers coming down from Washington. They came in all manner of ways, some in stylish carriages, others in city hacks, and still others in buggies, on horseback, and even on foot.
Like, you wouldn't have any idea what was happening if all you can hear is guns and see smoke. You can't see nothing.
Apparently, everything in the shape of vehicles in and around Washington had been pressed into service for the occasion. It was Sunday, and everybody seemed to have taken a general holiday. That is, all the male population, for I saw none of the other sex there, except a few huckster women who had driven out in carts loaded with pies and other edibles. All manner of people were represented in this crowd, from the most grave and noble senators to hotel waiters. But there were also ladies who had come to see the battle. They just seemed to have ended up in a different place from where the captain was. They were actually near to where Russell, the correspondent, was. He said that on the hill beside me there was a crowd of civilians on horseback and in all sorts of vehicles, with a few of the fairer, if not gentler, sex.
Again, this man is throwing so much shade about everybody. It is amazing. I love it.
A few officers and some soldiers who had struggled from the regiments in reserve moved about among the spectators and pretended to explain the movements of the troops below, of which they were profoundly ignorant.
He's amazing.
The spectators were all excited, and a lady with an opera glass who was near me was quite beside herself when an unusually heavy discharge roused the current of her blood.
She got excited.
"That is splendid, oh my! Is not that first rate? I guess we will be in Richmond tomorrow." The battle had officially begun, though Russell, who at first was a nice safe distance, decided that he wanted to get a better look. After all, he had been a war correspondent for years and had been there on the battlefield in the Crimean War at the siege of Sevastopol and wrote about witnessing the charge of the Light Brigade. Well, it's hard to write detailed accounts of a battle when you're miles away just seeing puffs of smoke over the trees. So, when a Union officer rode up to this group of people and exclaimed, "We have whipped them on all points," he took the opportunity to move closer to the battlefield. and he wasn't the only one. Because back in the other area where Captain Tidball was, he said that their view was entirely obscured by trees. And most of the sightseers were evidently disappointed at what they saw, or rather did not see.
That makes sense.
They no doubt expected to see a battle as represented in pictures, the opposing lines drawn up as on parade with horsemen galloping hither and thither, and probably expecting to see something of the sort by a nearer view of the field, they hurried on in the direction of the sound of battle, leaving their carriages by the roadside or in the fields. Now, most of these men that were going off to see the battle were members of Congress, older men in their 40s, 50s, even 60s, and Tidball says that they're like wearing full suits and hats and really not dressed for the July heat, especially running across fields and into a battle. But he wasn't going to stop them. That wasn't really his thing to do. He stayed where he was until finally someone came and told him that they were winning the battle and that it is time for him to move up his guns. Unfortunately, the distance between him and the battlefield made it so that information was about an hour old, and a lot can change in an hour. See, as the Confederate Army faltered and was pushed back, reinforcements arrived by rail, and they were led by General Thomas Jackson, who bolstered the line unaffected by the hail of bullets all around him. One Confederate officer pointed to him and shouted, "Look, men, there stands Jackson like a stone wall," earning him the sobriquet of Stonewall Jackson. The Confederate Army rallied and quickly turned what looked like a Union victory into a full rout of the Union Army. And a newspaperman from the New York Tribune who was there described the army, saying it was reduced to the condition of a motley, panic-stricken mob. The morale of the army was gone, and the instinct of self-preservation alone animated the flying mass.
Yeah, I guess once you actually start to see the actual reality of war and, you know, hearing the screams of men and horses and, like, you know, I feel like once you actually see it, it's very different. And, like, and if you're not trained, like, these people weren't trained well, yeah, you're gonna start running around, not really doing good. This is why we train. That's why we have a well-trained army these days.
Eventually, this news also reached Captain Tidball, who was told to now turn his artillery around and get off the roads to make room for the Union retreat. But it wasn't just him that was clogging up the roads. It was also all of those carriages and wagons that the spectators had left when they went to get a closer look at the battle.
We need valet parking, baby.
Spectators who were now fleeing from the battlefield just as the soldiers were. Tidball wrote that he saw them in the distance emerging from the trees, running toward him. And one of those people was Senator Henry Wilson of Massachusetts, who was lagging behind some of his fellow congressmen. Tidball wrote that next came Wilson, hot and red in the face from exertion. When young, he had been of athletic shape, but was now rather stout for uphill running. When he reached my battery, he halted for a moment, looked back, and mopping the perspiration from his face, exclaimed, "Cowards! Why don't they turn and beat back the scoundrels?" Ironically, he says this while he's running for his own life, and while he's leaving his friend, Senator Benjamin Wade from Ohio, in the dust. Wade was over 60 at the time and probably also shouldn't have been running up hills at a battlefield. And it actually was not his friends who waited for him, but it was Captain Tidball who waited for him to come up the hill, and then before letting him move on, he sat him down, gave him some whiskey, and then said, "Okay, finish your retreat." Each of the picnickers, as they got back to where the carriages had been left, took the first one at hand, or the last if he had his wits about him enough to make a choice. Thus, jumping into the carriages, off they drove so fast as lash and oaths could make their horses go. Carriages collided, tearing away wheels or stuck fast upon saplings by the roadside. Then the horses were cut loose and used for saddle purposes, but without the saddles.
Everyone going bareback.
These fleeing picnickers were the lucky ones because there were some who did not so easily escape. Like Congressman Alfred Ely of New York, who found himself surrounded by Confederate forces and was captured and sent to Libby Prison in Richmond, Virginia. That was one of the prisons that I talked about in last year's video.
I am looking, I am checking the dates on all these people. I'm like, okay, well, they survived this. Okay, well, he survived this. Okay, well, he survived this.
Civil War prison food. It was not a great prison to be at. and Libby was there for 6 months before finally being part of a prisoner exchange. And while he was there, he wrote in his diary, "Among other things, I found that to visit battlefields is a mere pastime, or with the view of gratifying a panting curiosity, or for the sake of listening to the roar of shotted artillery and the shrill music of flying shells, which motives, however, were not exactly mine, is neither a safe thing in itself, nor a justifiable use of the passion which Americans are said to possess for public spectacle." The Union Army ended up suffering nearly 2,900...
Look, okay, I should be a little bit more charitable. Like I said earlier, I know that people used to like go and like actively watch executions as like a day out kind of thing. Because there was nothing else to do in the past but watch people die, I guess. So, and you know, I like action movies. You know, I understand where if you don't really have a solid understanding of what the danger would actually be, you know, it might make sense that you would be interested. Because, like, you've seen the images of, like, you know, the American Revolution. You've probably heard some stories about that. It's like the standing in the lines. And, like, we've always made war out to be heroic and interesting and, you know, the good guys win or whatever. Like, we've always kind of told those stories, and we didn't really start talking too much about, like, the gravitas of it all for a long time. And, like, even things like people in general, like, who were not actually soldiers, didn't seem to really realize what was truly going on until they started sending news crews out there. And even those in World War II, for instance, were heavily propagandized. And so it wasn't even until times like in Vietnam where they were really sending back very true images of what was currently happening that people started really starting to understand, I think. And then there's always so long between wars, it feels like, you know, big ones. Here in America, because obviously there's a lot of other places where things are always happening. But we're really isolated from the true trauma and horror and awfulness of war. And so we can see things on Instagram or on newspapers or something, and it still doesn't quite click about how terrible things really are until you're really experiencing it. So, all of that to say, I should be more charitable towards these old-timey folks who didn't really understand.
100 casualties, including 460 killed, and the Confederates suffered just under 2,000 casualties, with 387 killed. The battle was much bloodier than most anyone thought that it would be at the time, but it pales in comparison with the later battles where you have tens of thousands of casualties. The reason that the battle was important, rather, was that, one, it showed people that this was not going to be a quick victory for either side, but it also spurred the North into action. President Lincoln called for 1 million volunteers to sign up for 3-year enlistments rather than the 3 months after the attack on Fort Sumter, and the people heeded the call, swamping recruitment offices over the next few weeks. So personally, the most interesting thing about the Battle of Bull Run for me has to do with a civilian, a grocer named Wilmer McLean. McLean had a home near Manassas, and he allowed General Beauregard, the Confederate general, to stay there and make it his headquarters in the days before and during the battle. And actually, a couple days before the battle, there was an artillery skirmish, and a cannonball came busting through the fireplace and into the kitchen while the general was there. Well then, a year later, there was a second battle at Bull Run, and it also was like on his front yard where this battle took place. And so McLean was like, yeah, I'm out of here. I'm moving 120 miles south to Appomattox. Well, fast forward to April 1865, and General Lee is there making his last stand at Appomattox against the Union Army, which he loses. And so he needed to find a place to surrender his army to the Union General Ulysses S. Grant, and he asked McLean if he could use his parlor, which he did. And years later, McLean was said to have remarked that the war began in my front yard and ended in my parlor.
Dang.
And now, let us make our sandwiches.
I feel like I'd heard of him before, but like I don't ever remember that particular story. But that is really interesting.
Sandwiches in the mid-19th century were really, really basic. It was just usually bread with some butter and a piece of meat, and that was it. And usually it was chicken or ham or tongue. A lot of tongue sandwiches at the time, but I did find a recipe from a Northern cookbook from 1857 that is specifically for sandwiches for traveling, which is perfect for a picnic.
Great.
And it says, sandwiches for traveling may be made of the lean of cold beef, roast or boiled, cut very thin, seasoned with French mustard, and laid between 2 slices of bread and butter. So all you do is spread some butter on some white bread. That would have been the common sandwich bread at the time. Then add some sliced roast beef, then spread a little Dijon mustard on top. What this recipe doesn't include that most recipes from the time do is that the crusts of the bread should be cut off.
Why?
And here we are. A picnic lunch ready to enjoy at the Battle of Bull Run.
Why are they cut off?
So let us start with the sandwich. It's just roast beef, a little butter, a little mustard, nothing crazy.
Sounds fine. Like, I mean, I don't like roast beef, but...
Basic?
I like Dijon, though.
I usually don't put butter on my sandwich bread. That's actually really nice. Butter just makes everything better. But honestly, it's just a basic sandwich. Not a lot you can do. A little bit later on in history, sandwiches get really interesting. If you ever watch Sandwiches of History, which is another channel, he does lots of really cool sandwiches, but they're usually from a little later on in history. What should be more interesting is the pound cake.
Oh, how did it come out, sir?
So, most pound cakes today, like I said, they either add some leavener, chemical leavener, or they cheat and they alter the amount of butter. You know, it should be 1 pound of each, but they'll cheat and make it so there's a little bit more egg or something that gives it a little bit more rise. Yeah. This is definitely denser than most pound cakes today, but not horribly. It doesn't look stodgy. But it got actually a good rise on top. Let's give it a try. Super flavorful.
Ooh, I mean, it does look good.
That nutmeg is lovely. The brandy, you can really taste the brandy in a pleasant way.
So you'd want to get a brandy you know you like, is what I'm hearing from that.
Not boozy. It's just the flavor of the brandy. That's actually a lot better than most pound cakes today, I think.
Oh.
The flavor is much more complex.
Cool.
The texture, I mean, it could be a little bit lighter. It is dense.
Like I said, though, I do trust a Southerner with sweet treats. Like, I definitely, if it's cake in nature or like biscuits, anything like that, I do trust a Southerner when it comes to my sweet treats and baked goods.
But not unpleasantly so. Like I said, it's not stodgy, it's just dense. But the flavor is really, really good. This one's worth making. The sandwich, I mean, it's a sandwich. So make this picnic lunch and eat it, but not at a battle. Don't go picnicking on a battlefield. That's just, it's not something to do, especially because, like the Congressman Alfred Ely, you might end up in a Confederate prison. And nobody wants that. So make this, eat it, not on a battlefield, and I will see you next time on Tasting History.
Again, I forgot, I meant to look at that before, I think, that shit on a shingle. I feel like we've had that before, and it's like salty and it's good. But anyway. Anyway, that's that. I am still very hungry, and I still want food, and I think I'm going to take a break and go and make some, because I have pasta. Actually, I've got Thai food left over. I've got like these like basil noodles that I am going to go eat, because they're super good. But yeah, like I was saying, I was like, I need to be a little bit more charitable about people who like didn't think about it being dangerous to go to a battlefield. Because you know what? They didn't have a lot of experience. They didn't have a lot of the same stories that we have nowadays. And again, even people in the 70s didn't really think about it until like they actually started seeing it for themselves. So we are all, I feel like humans in general, we're visual learners, we're experiential learners. Like you can tell people stories all you want to until they see it for themselves. They're not really going to believe it. That feels very natural and human, and I understand. And so I'm going to be a little bit nicer for the rest of the day about going to go and watch a war. But anyway, thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to go eat food.